Hi everyone, so this is a complete prompt engineering masterclass. When I was recording them, I was thought of putting in separate videos, but now it's a single video, so you can go through it in one shot and learn a lot of things. If you did learn something, please like, share, and subscribe. It will help me out a lot, and I would love to see you in the next one.
And in this module, we're going to try to answer one very simple question. What is prompt engineering? Now, you might be thinking, obviously, you know what is prompt engineering, and that's why you are watching this video. But the idea is there are much deeper ways to understand what prompt engineering is. And for that, we need to go back a little bit. Prompt engineering is nothing but giving instructions, right? And now giving instructions might sound super simple, but there is a nuance to it, right? For example, let me just explain you how computers process our knowledge. They don't process in the same way that we are talking. So you can understand what I'm speaking because you know English and you can process grammar, context, and a lot of other things. Computers, sadly, don't work like that, at least today. They still process knowledge in zeros and ones, which are called binary. Now, again, this is not a computer class, but I just want to tell you that how difficult it is for computer to process what we are talking about, right? So we had first binary instructions, which is just in zeros and ones, which you can take an example of Morse code or something else, or then you had programming languages, which are prevalent today. There are multiple of them. Some popular ones are like Python, Java, and everywhere, where you can talk in specific instructions in a coded way. So there are rules on how can you write Python and Java, and once you use those rules, you can talk to the computer to do something that you wanted to do, right? And then finally, we come to prompt engineering, or talking to computer using natural language. Now, natural language is nothing but me talking to you. I'm talking in my natural language. And the same way, computers also are able to understand natural language right now. That's what all these AIs are doing, all these LLMs are doing. They're just trying to understand what you are speaking about and give you an answer based on your specific instructions. Now, the question comes then, why the hell is it so difficult for computers to understand your instructions? Well, the answer is very simple. You are talking to a computer. Even though it is understanding your natural language, its processing comes down to very simply computer instructions. There are multiple nuances that we'll talk about, but the idea is people sometimes confuse talking to an AI and talking to a computer as two different things. When you're talking to AI, because you're talking to a natural language, you just feel that it should just get whatever you are saying. It should just understand you. Because again, it's an AI, it's supposed to understand, but we haven't quite reached there yet. Prompt engineering right now depends upon how good you are at giving instructions, how well you can explain computer your instructions. And talking to a computer is not the same as talking to a human for one reason. It's about the context and understanding that a computer might not have, which a person might have. For example, if you're standing in an adventure park and you ask someone that which is the best ride to go to, it will tell you probably the one that they have been to themselves, or if they are your best friend, they will know the ride that you enjoy the most. But if you talk the same way to the computer, they will give you the best highly rated ride in the park. So that might be something that you might not even enjoy. Maybe it's a water slide that you have no interest on going on. And that is where context and understanding comes in place. That is why giving instructions to computer is very different than giving instructions to people, at least today. So we're going to test this, and we're going to test this in a very simple way by asking AI to write an email, right? So let's get started. This is Rob, and we have instructions to Rob for writing an email, right? And let me say this. Send an email to my colleague telling that I'll be traveling for work. Now, I'm expecting a very generic email, right? But there are some things that you will notice which tell you that this is specifically written by AI, right? Now, the point is, if you see, first of all, there is no colleague's name. Why is there no colleague's name? For one very simple reason, it does not know who your colleague is. But imagine if Rob was your assistant, like a personal secretary, they would know all the details, right? So I wanted to inform you that I'll be traveling for work-related purposes, and then you can see that they have nothing other than start date or end date. They have not put anything. They don't know why we are traveling, right? I will ensure all responsibilities are covered, but you don't actually know that. You have just guessed that because your instruction that you gave to your AI is very simple. Send an email to my colleague telling them that I'll be traveling for work. And that, I'll say, is a dumb instruction because, first of all, AI can't understand what you are saying. So what do? We improve the prompt, right? And let me show you how we do that. This is a much better prompt, which includes sending an email to my colleague whose name is Raj, telling them I'll be traveling for work to New York where I'm meeting our new franchise owners. right? And that is super important. You have given it much more detail than previous prompt. And let's see how it turns out, right? Let's test this. We are going to test everything that we are talking about. So let's go and test this. Now I have already pasted it here and we're using ChatGPT 4, and just see the quality of email that changes. Okay. Hi Raj, I wanted to inform you that I'll be traveling to New York for work. During this trip, here is what I'll be doing. And again, I'll be out of office starting from which date to return date. Again, it did not know when we are going out, right? But at least it has given much better details. Where I'm traveling, what am I traveling for, and at least tell me that, yes, I will be available via email and you can reach me out. And again, that's super important. That is so much better. Right now, it knows my name because I've been using ChatGPT for a long time. So it has my name in memory, and we'll be talking more about that. But the idea is pretty simple. You have a much better prompt by just giving it two couple of lines more. And that is what prompt engineering is all about. It's about giving better instructions. It's talking to AI in a way that you would actually talk to an intern. I always give this example. Think of AI as an intern, right? Now, why so much difference? Very simply because it does not know the context and the understanding, right? So here is why I put this. Instead of shouting at your PC, when you always want to keep shouting at your PC, remember this: it does not know you. It does not do anything extra. And it always ensures to follow instructions. I wanted to write those 3 lines and make sure that you remember that, because around this whole course, remember, the computer is trying to do exactly what you want it to do. The AI is going to do exactly what you want it to do. So because we did not give it any other dates, it did not add dates in any of the prompts. If I had given it that I'm going from 11th July to 14th July, it will know better, right? Again, this is a simple example, but you need to understand why prompt engineering and what does prompt engineering mean. In simple terms, it's just about giving better instructions. Well, with that, you are technically ready to start the course and understand much more deeper, right? And that's why I want to say, again, remember what we talked about, because this is the core of everything. Hi, and welcome back. And in this module, I'm going to teach you the basics of prompting. This is going to set up our foundations on what we are going to talk about, everything in the course, and also to help you understand that there are much more techniques than you right now use, or there are some techniques that you use but you don't know about, right? So first steps first, right? Even before we start with prompting, I have to tell you about the multiple tools that exist where you can use prompting, right? And one of them is obviously the most famous one, ChatGPT, right? And I think a lot of you would have used ChatGPT 100% in the last 2 years. The second one, which is much more popular, is Claude. This is by a company called Anthropic, right? And then similarly, Google has their Gemini, Meta has their Meta AI. And then one of the favorite ones that I have is Hugging Face Chat. It is an open source model. So the point is that you can try multiple different models that are completely open source by companies for your own use cases. The reason why all these tools exist is because every company wants you to use their own AI. And the reason behind that is that because you use their AI, you might in future want to also use their AI for business purposes, right? So very specifically, remember that there are much more tools than ChatGPT available to use AI. And in addition to that, why is that important? Is for one simple reason, and that is every tool is better at its own things. For example, I'll give you my preference, right? ChatGPT is great for a ton of tasks. But when I have to code, I go back to Gemini and start coding there. But when I have to write something or long pieces of text, Claude is probably a better option. Now, again, it's up to you. It's a personal choice. There is no definitive answer to that. It is completely up to you on what you like. But yes, for most purposes, ChatGPT does perform better in a lot of other models that exist out there. So my default, like a lot of people's default, is ChatGPT, right? But these are only tools. There is also one more step that most of us sometimes forget about, and that is models. Now, ChatGPT is like an app. Like, you have Gmail as one email provider. You have Outlook also as another email provider, right? Similarly, ChatGPT is just an app. It uses much more models to work on us. Now, what are models? Models are simply different LLMs trained with different set of data, different instructions, and everything else. Now, a lot of these companies have multiple models. As you can see in the list, ChatGPT itself has 4 models, which are the latest popular ones. There are multiple others, 3.5 and everything, and I've reduced this list to just capture the most latest models available in 2024. Gemini, in addition to that, again, is part of Google's family, and there are proprietary models. Now, when I say proprietary and open models, the difference between that is proprietary means you can't see what's going behind the scenes in that, While open source models are publicly available for anyone to use for their own use cases, you can run it on your own machines without paying anything to these companies, and also look into the hood and see what is happening. If you are very technically inclined, you can go ahead and check them out. In addition to that, all these models also come with something called a context window. Now, what is a context window? Right? Very specifically and very simple terms, context is the amount of information the model can process in one shot. Like in one conversation, how much information the model can process, right? So if you see GPT-4 and GPT-4 Turbo can process 8,000 tokens or 128,000 tokens. Now, tokens are technically like, you can say one token is equal to 3 words, right? So for something like 8,000 tokens, you can probably process like a 200-page book. But after that, I'm pretty sure it will start having issues with itself, right? On the other hand, if you look at Gemini models, which are like these huge 1 million token models, they can process a huge amount of data, right? And like I have seen people using 1,500 pages of content being processed by Gemini. And they are actually trying to double that to 2 million tokens in the end of this year to make it much more bigger, and so that you can process much more data. Now, all these things are important. The specifically most important one is the context window, because if you're processing a large amount of data, you can choose which one do you want to use. You can't use GPT-4 for the same use cases that you're using a Gemini model for. So again, there are ways to do this, but this is just information so that you understand what is the difference between an app and a model. Now, let's come to the first basic use case. And this is how most people use AI. That's why I've written that there. And they always have this frustrated, simple look on their face. And that is zero shot. Now, what is zero shot? What most people ask is they just simply write a question to ChatGPT and expect it to answer in the most brilliant way possible, covering all their use cases. And that, as you know, does not happen. So we're going to test this, right? In this, we are going to use an example prompt of write an email to my manager asking for his thoughts on my proposal, right? So let's come here and let's test this out, okay, on how does this look. I'll let it run. Okay, first, very simply, it did not even write an email, right? The point is, I will just say, imagine a marketing proposal. Okay, and I'm all on caps and my spellings are wrong, but it works out, okay? So very simply, again, it will just start writing everything. But if you look at the idea, the first thing is it did not know what I'm talking about, right? And it asked me specifically on what this proposal is about, right? So if you look at it here, you can see there are multiple models. Just to show you, there is GPT-4o, GPT-4 and 3.5. GPT-4 is paid. I have already paid for ChatGPT, so I can see a lot of you might just be using GPT 3.5, but the difference is crazy. For our use case, we are just going to use this. Now again, it has written an email, but the point is it does not know what is in the proposal, so it has just imagined and put everything together about marketing. But let's look at what is a better way to use this, right? And again, you can use zero shot. I use zero shot a lot of times when you're just asking basic questions. For example, you want to ask it how to write an HTML hello world, right? It will give you the right answer. Or how do you want to write a simple essay about why I am the best country in the world for any country that you want to put in, right? So very simply, you can put anything that you want, but again, don't expect great answers and don't think that AI is bad just because it does not work like that. Okay. Now, this is a much better way. This way is where I think 70% of your use cases should be utilizing this, right? Every time that you are writing, you should just use this. And it's called multi-shot. Now, what is multi-shot, right? And multi-shot has multiple names. So it has one shot, few shot, and then you'll have multi-shot. Multi-shot just means you give an example. Now, if you give one example, it's called one shot. If you give multiple examples, it's multi-shot, right? Right now, what I have written as an example prompt is kind of a multi-shot, right? Very simply, it has one example and it has some more details about how to process it. Now, this is a much better prompt. And again, don't take my word for it. We are going to test it out in front of you and see how it works, right? Okay. And very simply, till the point it is writing, I would like to explain you the prompt. Very simply, task, write an email asking for manager on the thoughts on a proposal. But here, I've given it much more details about the proposal itself. I have attached my deck for our organization. So here is a previous email that I've sent to him, right? So this is how I write my emails, right? And then I've asked it, the current proposal details the market insights on why health tech space is booming, and we are a company which is loved by consumers for healthy food space. Why am I writing this? Why am I not giving it proposal? If you're working in corporate environments, you might not be allowed to use ChatGPT. So you can just ask it in a more higher way that this is what data is present in the proposal, and I want you to write that. Now, if you just look at the email, it has first of all written an email in one shot. It has not asked us what is in the proposal and everything, but they are actually writing a proper proposal on why we should go into the health tech product space, Why do I believe that is great? And also talk more about everything that I would like to build in from consumers perspective and everything else. Again, this is a great way to understand how multi-shot and few one shot differs. Sorry, how multi-shot and zero. And this is a great way to understand how multi-shot and zero shot differs, right? So if you are ever writing prompts, I always would say that always give at least one example and also give it some more context. Context is super important. Things taken out of context in the real world also are super horrible. So whenever you're talking to AI also, just give it a bit more context. And that itself can make your prompts so much better than you could ever imagine. And now we are going to deep into prompting frameworks. Now, prompting frameworks are just a specific way on writing instructions to AI to get results, right? And we've talked about why instructions are important. But prompting frameworks give you a kind of like a blueprint on how to write a prompt, right? And to understand deeply about prompting frameworks, we have to look at multiple examples. The first and my favorite one is persona prompting. And I'll tell you the reason why. What if I told you that you could talk to anyone in this world, dead or alive, by just using AI, by just giving it enough context, right? You would either call me crazy or you would say, how do I do that? So let's focus on the how part, right? Very simply, I need to first explain you what a persona is, right? A persona is technically a fictional character, right? With specific traits and characteristics designed to represent a user, right? We try to use personas to represent a user for shopping, for a customer product, or for anything else. But persona is anyone. You can define me as a persona. For example, how is Akshat Bahety a persona? He probably likes to talk a lot and teach people about AI, right? And how will he answer this question? And if I have written a couple of books that are specifically about me or biographies and everything, I can probably load that into the AI and talk from that specific perspective. That means that you can make AI talk as me or as technically anyone in the world. So we're going to test this and we're going to explain how we can use this in a much more efficient way. So one of my favorite people of all time that I would love to have a lunch with one day if I am successful enough is to talk to Warren Buffett, right? But until then, very specifically, I used ChatGPT to build something that acts as Warren Buffett, right? So let me show that to you, right? I would like to just ask, how do you manage your time? Okay, how do you manage your time? And I need to get rid of this caps lock, but again, does not matter. So let's see what the answer is. Now, it has a lot of data, right? Very simply, it has a lot of information about Warren Buffett. I put in around all his shareholder letters, all his books and everything, and you can just see. So first of all, it talks about very specifically prioritization, right? I've spent a lot of time reading and thinking, now this is specifically Warren Buffett, right? Warren Buffett reads a lot, like technically a lot, right? He reads annual reports, he reads books, he reads a lot, right? So again, very specifically, you can understand how Warren Buffett approached his time management, right? Delegation, routines, saying no, being selective, continuous learning, and everything, right? And the question then I have is, what would you recommend to a 20-year-old in college, right? Let's say someone is in college and they want to understand how to manage their time in college, right? Very simply, like the idea is key pieces of advice: invest in yourself, read wisely, develop good habits, build relationships, stay curious, again, being patient. Very simply, these are all things that have been put down as Warren Buffett. And you can go ahead and search about this. You can search about what Warren talks about, how he has told in videos and everything. But this is acting as Warren Buffett because I've given it the persona, the traits and characteristics of Warren Buffett. I will also link this in the description so that you can go ahead and check this out. You can talk to Warren Buffett yourself. I've loaded it with enough data that it has a good knowledge base to reference Warren Buffett information for, right? Again, for famous people, it's very simple to build because ChatGPT itself has a lot of knowledge about that person. But for others also, you can build this by just adding more emails, documents written by them or something else, right? So that's an example of how persona prompting works, right? But building the prompt is not that easy, okay? So let me show you how I build my prompts. Now, very simply, building a persona has multiple things. Now here I have taken an example of building a persona for a chief marketing officer of a health tech brand, right? So first we start with one very simple thing. What does our persona do, right? Very simply, what does our persona do, right? So he's a chief marketing officer. Where is chief marketing officer is at a health tech brand, right? Then what does he have? He has over 20 years of experience in marketing with focus on digital strategies and brand management. Now, when you look at this experience part, you can actually change it to make maybe he's great at traditional marketing, which is marketing in newspapers and advertisements and hoardings and everything else, right? and he might have served as a leading software company. Instead of that, you can put maybe he has served as the head of chief marketing for a social media brand. If you're trying to build something in social media, if you're trying to build something on a traditional brand in America, take the best example of marketing that you have and give that as a persona. Anything that you want, you can give it based on your inputs. For me, this worked to like see someone from a tech space coming into health tech brand and how do they combine that. It is up to you on how to define persona. The best way is to take important examples and reference them based on what kind of output you want. If you were hiring a chief marketing officer, who would be your ideal candidate? Right? Then second part, what is this person's persona communication style, right? So first of all, he's very professional, only cares about data, and any argument presented to him should be backed by data. Now, if you want someone data driven, you can just put that, right? You can just tell them that it's specifically about data for him. You have to tell everything by data. The point is, you can use it in multiple aspects. And I'm going to show you how the final prompt looks like, right? Again, what data can we give? So do you have emails from this person, or do you have reference of emails from famous marketing managers, or do you have reference of other things that you can use, right? Then what is his personality like, right? What is his specific personality like? He's highly analytical, right? Again, why do you want to write that? Because again, you want to re-emphasize on the data part, you want to re-emphasize on his understanding of things, right? And then you tell him that he's a decision maker and everything else, right? Again, this is how you build a prompt. It took me probably around an hour defining this, because you have to be very careful on what you are trying to write down, what you want in the persona to be. Once you're very clear with that, you can reuse this persona multiple times, right? This is how the final prompts look like, right? Very specifically, you have, okay, you are the CMO at a leading health tech brand. And again, I've already taken all of that from above. But if you look at the communication style, right? I've written it, please provide your analytical insights on any given task, right? Your feedback should be data driven, addressing specific metrics, findings that support our challenge, the current approach. Because behind that is not only the persona, you also want to tell it how do you want it to respond, right? Sometimes it might just have the persona, but don't respond in a way that you want it to, right? Highlight any potential oversight and suggest strategic adjustments based on your extensive experience, right? Again, we've just given it a bit more detail. Now, this is the basic setup, right? After this, we want to give it a task. Now, what is the task about? And also how we utilize everything that we wrote before into putting into this task. Very specifically, write a detailed email about a brand that health focused food subscriptions, leveraging existing customer base. Now, again, you can read through the whole task. The simple idea of this task is that you want to write, again, we want to start with a task that this persona needs to complete, right? Now, very simply, I'm not going to read through all of that. You can read through it, pause it, and check it out. The idea is that this task, whatever we are talking about, is specifically about bringing in health-based food subscriptions for already an existing brand. And now he's trying to write an email to the board of why this works. Why will this work with our brand, right? Now, this is something that you can use when you are actually don't have a chief marketing officer, or you might be a CEO, or you might want to clone yourself, or you might want to clone some other persona. You can literally clone all your employees and give them specific things, or you can build your own employees in ChatGPT, right? So let's look at the response that this person has built in this, right? So let's come back. I've already loaded the prompt because it's pretty big. So first I give it a background in communication style. This is the way to write this prompt. First you give it this, and then second you give the task and the expected outcome of that task. Expected outcome is very specific because you have to make sure that do you want it to write a proposal, do you want it to write an email, do you want it to write a proposal as an email, and everything else, right? Again, expected outcome is about how you want it to respond in the most perfect way possible. Okay, so let's read how does this response look like. Okay, so dear members of the executive board, I hope this message finds you well. First of all, you look at it. Given that it had so much data, it has written a very amazing email, right? Very simply, I'm not going to read this through because again, you can read the email if you want. Strategic alignment, leverage existing customer base, enhance customer lifetime value. Now, again, these things we did not even mention it, but because LTV is a very important thing in software businesses, in any other business, it understands what it is talking about, right? If you give it more data about your company, it can talk more in detail. So again, you can see financial and market growth share, feedback and iteration, conclusion, and everything else, right? As a companion brand, represents strategic, forward-thinking approach, and etc. Now we can make it do a lot. We can also give it a name, and it can directly write an email. But it has taken so much data from our prompts, right? It has taken how do we leverage the data? What is my experience when? So LTV and something is something that you specifically talk about in a customer business facing business, and it has brought all of that to this email. This email, I'll be honest, you can actually send this email, copy and paste this, show this to an investor or to a board, and they'll say this is a very well written document, right? You can ask it to do a proposal, you can ask it to do an analysis, you can ask it to do anything. This persona is literally your own requirement. Whatever you want, you can ask it persona to do. Writing emails, managing employees, everything. And this is the future of how AI looks like. But if you understand persona prompting, you can do a lot, right? And this is why I always say this is one of my favorites, right? Where can you use it? Well, very simply, you can clone your colleagues. Literally, you can clone. Let's say you talk a lot to your CXOs, talk a lot to your manager, you write a lot of emails, and maybe they have some feedback on your emails, right? You can create yourself. You can clone yourself as an email writer. You can put everything together and tell them, okay, here is how I write emails. Here is the feedback that I received. Here is how I write proposals. Here is the feedback I received. And you can create your own persona. Here is what I do. Here is what my job description is. Here is what I am supposed to do. Here is what my responsibilities are. And put that all, and you can clone yourself. Second, and probably one of the things that we did with Warren Buffett, talk to your heroes. You can literally talk to the people that you would not get a chance right now. So anyone who that is, you want to talk to an actor, you want to talk to a director, a writer, a CXO, someone, you can just ask them to talk to your heroes, right? And then one of the most important ones is cloning your colleagues. Let's say you have a lot of colleagues, you have people working in specific departments, and you can clone them. You can say, okay, you know what? Here is a persona of a chief human resource officer or a chief financial officer working on Indian laws or American tax laws. And the more definitive you make your persona, you can ask it to do anything you want. Make accounting balance sheets, make plan for employee engagements, make plan for running a company, or you want them to create operations plan, or you wanted to write a project management plan. Again, it's completely up to you on how you want to use your persona, how you want to talk to it, how you want to discuss with it. But it's about writing it down. So again, I'll just reiterate this and write, start with this framework. Start with this framework whenever you start writing a persona. Start by writing all these things. And again, I'll be attaching this as the deck, so you can always reference back to this. You can write this down, take a piece of paper, take a slide, write it out. Start writing these things out. Then building the prompt is pretty simple. You can just put all these things together and your prompt is ready. Now, again, this is one of the most powerful tools that you have in your arsenal. Literally, your prompt engineering can be done very well using persona prompt. You can make it act as a coder, a developer, a technical. Again, I can keep giving you examples. But the idea is, the better you become at persona prompting, the more better you will become at doing everything else. Hi. So in this framework, and this is one of you can say an extremely complex framework to understand, but if you understand it well, you can use it for solving quite a bit of complex tasks. Now, when I say why it is complex, it's very specifically because you have to understand how thought processes work, how our brain works, and how we process knowledge. We are trying to do the same in a very real context with AI, right? So whenever you're thinking about a problem, you don't just think about it narrow, right? You just don't think about, okay, how do I make a pen? You think about multiple ways. If I'm making a pen, what material do I use? Which kind of functionalities do I need to build? And multiple other options. So you have multiple thought processes going in your mind. And even in real life, when you're talking about any kind of problem, you are not just thinking about it alone most of the times, right? You are thinking about with multiple people, and even if not with multiple people, you are trying to make a lot of decisions which have multiple kinds of input. In the previous formats, what we have seen, every time it's a kind of a single person type of format. So in persona prompting, you just make one persona and make that person attack the problem that you are trying to solve. But in tree of thought, we try to go a bit more realistic, right? So very simply, this framework is really created by understanding that humans and the way we process information is through multiple trees of thoughts, multiple branches of thoughts. Now, when you see on the image also, I try to represent that you are trying to put in a lot of information together to find the best solution, right? So again, it's like a meeting of experts who come together to solve a common problem. Even if you're working alone or you're working in a team, these kind of things can help you solve problems which don't have a real answer. For example, 2 plus 2 is always going to be 4, but 2 plus x equal to something is always going to be different. And that's where we use tree of thought to solve problems which don't have definitive answers, right? So we're going to show you how we work about it. Okay, so we're going to test it in a very, very simple way. The context is that we want to really, really set up a team of teachers who are trying to discuss what is the best way to teach students about world history. In this whole prompt, I've set up 5 teachers which are going to vote on every teacher's idea and then discuss about that idea in the same prompt, right? So again, you can go through the prompt in detail, but let me show you how it works in real life. Okay, so let's come here and we're just going to set this up and send this out. And hopefully it should work technically, right? And we'll see how it works. So the first thing is everyone is presenting their own ideas, right, in the round 1. So you have language teacher proposing integrating world literature, math teacher suggests something using data and timelines, physics teacher is talking about how technology advanced on impact on the world, and then how social studies is all about creating portfolios on different eras, and physical education teachers is talking about how can we incorporate historical sports and games into the curriculum and teach people about world history, right? Now everyone is voting, right? So you can see Social study gets 3 votes and language gets 2 votes. Others receive none. Now, the idea is that we are going to select only one part of these teachers. So again, elimination, the teacher which receives the least votes is physical education, and they are asked to leave. That's how we have set up the rules. Right. Similarly, this will keep continuing, and I can say continue discussion, right? And until none left, right? So it will keep going on, and the point is it will go through every round to see which person's idea is the best one. The idea here is there is not a single way that you can say, okay, this is the best way to teach students about world history. So we are always going to keep looking at one after the other, right? So you can see round number 2, again, they tell about why we want to change our proposals, include better ideas, and work on that, right? Then again, they go ahead and vote for social studies, vote for social studies, vote for language, vote for language. And again, I've set it up that you can't vote for your own self. So again, social studies gets 2 votes and maths and physics get none, right? And this keeps going on until one of each are left. Because they can't vote for their own proposal, they can only vote for the other one. So the last 2 options left are one proposed by language teacher and the social studies teacher, right, on how to teach kids about this. Now, what I've done is I just asked it to give me the final ideas. And what I've asked is what I've done here is I've asked it to give me their final ideas using their pros and cons, right? And then again, it will give you what were the final ideas, which one was selected, and how to vote about that, right? Again, this is pretty great. You have the pros and cons, and this is like simulating a debate between all these teachers in a single format, right? And that is super great, because when you are having a conversation where there is no right answer, you want to have these kinds of discussions, right? And again, this gives you a lot of thought about how to solve that problem in a better way. Again, this might not be one thing that you want to prefer. You might not want to go in depth with this. You might want to use something else. You might not want to use any of the ideas that are available there, but you can just look at the discussion and see what were the points it is. And then again, obviously look at it from a discussion perspective, right? Now, again, very simply, building this prompt takes time, right? And building also this prompt in a well-structured manner needs to have some structure and rules. And this is how the prompt setup looks like, right? The first thing is, what is your main goal? Right? What is the main goal that you want to be solved? For example, let's say in this context, we wanted to find a great way to teach students about how can they learn better, right? How can they learn about world history better? Now, in that, we said, okay, what are the branches that we want to explore? So if you look at the solution, we literally talked about specific branches, which were about physics teachers talking about it, language teacher, maths teacher, environmental studies, and everyone else. Why? Because when we are bringing multiple different thoughts of branches, we can see, okay, can be different ideas. For example, I would love to teach students about world history in a games format, so that, they can understand how Olympics and the World Games have impacted the world history. Or you can make it a whole 5-day thing where you teach kids one day about everything differently in a different format, because that can help with retention, that can help with understanding. Again, the idea is you set up the branches. But once you set up the branches, once you decide, okay, which teachers are there, you also need to define what are the guardrails, right? So what are the guardrails we want to set? So in my prompt setup, what we did was very specifically, everyone can vote only once for someone else's idea. They can't vote for their own idea, and the person who receives the least votes gets eliminated. And this keeps on going until we reach a final point, right? Because if you just say that this is just going to be a discussion where we never end up to a conclusion, we can keep discussing, and again, it can be a never ending debate, and that does not make sense. Whenever you're trying to have a tree of thought problem, whenever you're trying to solve a complex problem, you want to reach to a conclusion, right? You might want to do maybe 15 rounds of discussion, but you want to reach to some kind of conclusion after 15 rounds of discussion, right? And the only way to do that is to make sure that there are some guardrails in place, right? When we are trying to discuss, there should be some debate, some answers, and some way to format that discussion to come to a conclusion, right? So again, this is a great way to look at this and do that. Now, obviously, I have one more example for you, which is very different than what we saw. In this example, what we are trying to do is that a team which has a grocery shopping app is trying to figure out a reorder button. Now, this is something based on what a real life example that I work and use an app for, right? Very specifically, they are trying to discuss, should we add this? What is going to be the impact between the user experience, the technical expert, and the business expert? Now, these 3 experts are going to have a discussion. And now here in this one, I don't have a final conclusion, right? But what I want is actually the points from each one of them to come up and tell you why this should or not be implemented. That's why I've written, again, they have to have a spirited discussion on the debate, ensuring all factors are considered, and each round should build upon the idea of the last round, and each round should be someone who disagrees and reasons why, right? So every time they're having a discussion, someone should disagree that we should not implement this, or we should implement this if the both other two are agreeing to implement this, right? Again, let's see it in discussion, right? It's very, very interesting to see these things in the prompt and see how it works, right? So Again, we're going to just go through a couple of rounds, right? The point is, you can see this person strongly believes, right? And the second person should be like, this is technically challenging, right? And then the technical team says, no, I don't want to have this, right? And then why not? And then you will put that how it matters to them and everything else. And we can keep going through these rounds, multiple rounds. But the idea is, now given that this discussion is happening, you can understand what kind of real life scenario you might be dealing with, right? You might be wanting to put, you can create personas for each one of them, and then give them detailed personas, give them more context, and then have the discussion even without talking to the stakeholders, right? You can see what kind of outputs come in. Let's say you are preparing for a meeting. You want to set this up, have that discussion internally within AI without telling anyone, and just to understand what kind of challenges can come up, what kind of questions can come up. And you can be so much well prepared for a meeting compared to anyone else, because nobody's expecting all the discussions to come, right? So you will have some emails, you will have some proposal, and you can put that here. So let's just go through this, okay? And I think it's gone for a couple of rounds, and we're just going to see how it looks. So very simply, it tells like, our current architecture isn't created, right? Very simply, then, okay, if we integrate in a less intrusive way. But the point is, however, the challenge remains. So the technical person is obviously challenged that this does not make sense for right now. It might slow down the app. There might be issues. And like, again, but it might reduce visibility and usage. And then again, the business team has also started finding like, there might be other challenges. Now, again, you can keep going through these discussions and you can see the challenges faced by each person. If you give it more context, if you give some emails, if you give some PPTs that you can have, and you're preparing for a very big meeting, you can have these challenges and discussions already done. Let's say you are a founder, you want to pitch to an investor. You can give it a deck, give who you are, who the investor is going to be, and then challenge yourself in working on this. I'm again for much more complex problems, right? Okay. So once you get the hang of it, once you get the hang of setting up the structure, setting up the prompts, you can understand how you can solve challenging problems, how you can solve problems which don't have the right answer. And the only thing you need to do is set up an idea, set up the user personas in a very basic sense. You can give it more detail if you want, you can give it more data you want, and then keep discussing about this. Okay. Now, what are the use cases, right? Very simply, again, we talked about this, right? So the use cases range a lot, right? Very specifically, they are solving complex tasks, right? One of the most ones is when you don't have a final answer, right? And that dog looks completely perplexed on what is it. It's a mystery, right? When the answer is not a yes or a no, it's not this or a that. It's completely between couple of ideas, between one of the strategies to take, right? So, a use case that I could think of, like finding the best tech stack, right? A lot of times, whenever you're building a product, whenever you're building a tech product, you always have this discussion around tech stack, okay? Which is the best tech stack to look at, what languages to choose, and people spend a lot of time in this, right? I'm still sure people will still spend time on discussions, but you can save your time, you can have that discussion, you can list down the pros and cons in one shot in a single piece. Then you can look at strategic discussions, right? Again, this is, let's say you want your company to choose between two strategies, right? But let's say you don't have all the experts in place, you don't have every person from everyone, from a consumer perspective, from business perspective, you don't have, but you can make their personas and say, you know what, say me why I should not do this strategy, or tell me why I should do this strategy. Here are my arguments. You can also participate in the discussion yourself. You can say, well, I'm going to be the third participant. So every time you have a discussion, ask me also for a response, right? And you can talk to it, right? Again, there are tremendous amount of ways that you can use this, and it is a very interesting activity to do. You can make your most favorite storybook characters talk to each other. You can have a Harry Potter play. You can have other plays that you want, and you can just keep going on that discussion. For example, what could be a different ending to Harry Potter? And you can put the director, the writer, and everyone in context. And because ChatGPT knows a lot about Harry Potter, it can play out different scenarios. Again, it's a very interactive way of understanding, learning, and teaching. But the point is, you need to figure out and you need to imagine how you want to use it. Okay. So, well, that's pretty much it for tree of thought, right? Again, it's super important and how it works. And it's also super important to utilize it in a very structured and thought process based manner. But once you start to get the hang of it, it's one of the most amazing things. You can have a very good spirited imagination based discussion with, and also helps you think through a lot. Okay. So with this, I will say, please go ahead and test it out. This is one of those techniques which you might or might not use on a daily basis. But if you want to be a prompt engineer on a regular basis, or if you want to use prompt engineering for technical requirements, you have to learn software prompting. Now, there is not a specific framework name which is very popular, but I just call it software prompting because it resembles how we program software right now, and how you can utilize the same kind of knowledge to also create prompts which follow a certain set of instructions, which then you can use. Okay, so let me bring you to a very simple way of using software prompting. One of them is when you have steps. Now, when I say when you have steps, software prompting follows a very simple logical process that you are trying to define a prompt when you have a certain number of steps and you want AI to follow them in the same sequence. Even if you want AI to decide the sequence, sometimes you still have a sequence in mind. For example, writing a poem For the topic given by user, follow the mentioned below steps. Number one step is to get the data of what the user has told. It needs to be a topic about a poem. For example, let's say instead of this, the user gave a topic about, I want you to write an essay. It should not respond to that. It should always and always strictly create a poem, right? Then the topic should be clear, and then it should write only 16 sentences of the poem, right? Now, this is a very simple example of how you can utilize steps in writing a prompt when you always want the prompt to work in a certain specific way, right? I'm going to show you a much bigger and more detailed example of how step-based prompting works, right? And how you can utilize that to create actually kind of your own softwares using just current AI models. It will be a bit complex on the end, but I am trying to simplify it as much as possible. But in case you might not have complete idea of how softwares work, this might seem challenging, but just stay with me. So let's get to it. Okay. Now I'm just going to show you one of my favorites creation. This is Stock GPT. Now it has a very simple logic. Okay. It gets the latest stock data from API. An API is nothing but just takes data from a real-time website. For example, I asked it to get the data about the Apple stock for the last 1 week. And it has asked me that as soon as I asked it that, it asked me, I have got the data. Do you want me to continue? And as soon as I mention continue, it should start creating a chart or ask me for more response. Now, as you can see, it has already talked to the API. It's going to proceed with chart creation, which is going to take some time. So we are just going to wait for that. Now, again, if you can see, it already generated a chart. It took a couple of minutes because it had to write all this code and explain this, right? And it has finally created a chart for Apple's data, Apple stock price data in the last 1 week. Now you can see that it has shown that how the prices are. It has a red and a green line showing a candlestick basically. Again, this is nothing perfect, but it works utilizing a feature called GPTs in ChatGPT, right? And I'll just quickly show you how this is built. So let me just come back here. You can see this is how you build a stock GPT. Now, I'm not going to give you a complete tutorial on how to build a GPT, but here is where you put the prompt and everything else, right? And then you have the conversation starters here, and you put in some documentation and knowledge if you want to. And here you put in your API details, right? So you can define the API and everything else. Again, I don't want to make it super technical, so I'm going to skip this part. But very simply, what I wanted to show you is it works in specific steps. As soon as I ask it for data, it first goes and collects the data. It does not create the chart right now. It just goes and collects the data. After that, it asks me that, do you want to continue with the chart creation? And only when I say continue, it goes ahead and processes all this code and creates the chart for me. Again, a very simple use case, but also shows you that you can convert your prompts into a step-based prompt, which the user can use as per their convenience, so that they are going through a journey rather than just giving instructions to an AI, which might or might not understand this. It's super powerful in a lot of use cases. Let's come back to our deck and like to see how these kind of prompts are built. Okay, so first, very simply, you start with the role description. Now, in this prompt, I started with the role description of an ICT trader analyst, right? Second thing that you set is a conversation flow, right? And again, a conversation flow is how you want the user to interact with the AI. For example, in case of mentioning that you should ask for user to give you a response of continue to create the chart, I could have just said, ask them to write, create chart XYZ, or give it a specific command. Anything that I want, I could have asked it to make sure that only when user says this specific word, create the chart, right? Second thing is that you define the features that the prompt has access to. For example, because we are using an API there, or you could be using a function, or you could be using something else, you have to define a feature. Let's say, for example, I'm saying that you have a feature available to you where you can call an API to get Apple stock data. And then again, within that, I mentioned some sub-processes to follow, which I'll explain you. Again, so role description, if you see, is very much like persona prompting. You can give it a persona and utilize it. And then you can just give the next steps on how it should be followed. So let me show you the prompt on how it looks. That will give you a bit more idea about how these things work. Okay. Very specifically, look at this, that first I start with a very simple example of what I want you to work as. So you have to act as an ICT trader analyst, and these are your primary responsibilities and everything else. Second thing that I'm defining is how do you want it to work? So first, it has to analyze user steps, break them down. Second, it has to make sure that, the following features which I'm mentioning after this are able to fulfill the user demands. Then it is to ensure that it has to break down what the user has asked into steps and do that, prompting the user to type continue to proceed. Again, this is how I want the conversation flow to work, right? And finally, you have this data collection API, which is I mentioned and utilize an API to bring the data about any stock in the world. So you can use an API key. This is the data format, the time intervals, symbol, and the country. Now, this is based on the API documentation. I did not need to do anything here a lot. except this one line, which is access time series data for financial instruments, right? And giving it a custom GPT action, which is technically just a feature named in the API that get time series data. Again, this is a very simple process, but here I'm defining the feature and then telling you what the details it has available to it to call the feature. So these kind of prompts are super exclusive and super useful when you are trying to build softwares which are going to be used by people, and also when you are expecting AI to follow a certain amount of steps to make sure that it processes the information in the exact way that you need it to. So whenever you are trying to build something for a production level system, you're going to use these kinds of prompts a lot, which are mostly step based. You might or might not build the APIs within that. You might be using another API call, or you might be giving it an option that this is the function that you need to call. But this is going to be more useful when you're working with technical products and everything else, right? So let's move forward and simply give you, again, I've told you about the use cases. They're pretty simple. Building custom GPTs, bots, or whenever you're building softwares which are going to be used by users is going to be super helpful. So again, one thing I'll reiterate is just remember this framework. This framework is pretty simple to keep in mind: the role description, the conversation flow, the feature, and then the sub processes. And again, you can build multiple features, you can build multiple sub processes. There is no limit up till and unless you have the idea of what you're writing, you have a structure to what you want the prompt to do, and just keep going with that. With that, I would like to say this is one of the most important ones to remember, and also one you will probably use a lot. So till then, I would say I would love to see you in the next one, but practice this prompt. It will take you some time to get used to, and I'll see you in the next one. Hi, and welcome to another very important module of this course, which is prompting challenges. There are tons of challenges when you are a prompt engineer, when you are trying to write prompts which are super effective, super amazing, but AI will bring you a spanner in the works, right? And it will throw you a ton of problems, right? And we're going to discuss about some of these challenges which are very common and how can you also try to solve them, right? Again, there's not a silver bullet in this, but there are actually quite a bit of discussions about the challenges you face and how you can find a way to solve them. Okay, so let's get started, right? The first challenge, and probably one of the most important ones, is clarity. Yeah, right? The point is, if you would have seen, the prompts that I use are extremely big, right? Extremely big. And the reason behind that is very simple. AI has a problem called hallucination, right? It's a feature sometimes, it's a bug sometimes, it depends upon what you're trying to use, right? So for example, if you're trying to write a story, hallucination is great because then AI can explore creative ideas. It can go and say, okay, you know what, let's see how Red Riding Hood would behave today in New York's world, right? Or how would a person like Harry Potter, instead of having magical powers, had hacking powers, right? Or he was completely a different person, right? So again, it's a great thing. But the point is, when you're trying to find use cases and when you're trying to solve for someone like a production based application, when you want it to generate a story which is very safe for kids to read without parental supervision, you have to make sure that the prompt performs perfectly, right? And that's why the prompts are long. And one thing I always people say, why are these so long prompts? The reason is they might not need to be, right? Sometimes they just work with a couple of lines. But the point is, I want them to perfectly work in every scenario possible, right? And the way to do that is obviously to make sure that everything that you want AI to do is clearly specified. So again, be very clear, be extremely clear while writing prompts, right? Don't leave anything to chance. Don't say, I want a beautiful web page created. Define what beautiful means, right? Because you might have an idea of beautiful and AI might have a completely separate idea. And these two things don't go hand in hand when you're trying to find or build something for real-time use cases. When you're exploring and you're just testing the prompts out, it makes sense. Try a couple of variations. But when you're trying to launch something, when you're trying to give that prompt for a production-based use case, you need to figure it out in the right format. Or if you want to build a prompt for yourself that you want to use every time and not try to rechange it, you have to be very clear, right? Okay, so coming to the next one, and which is again, very specific, is model understanding. So what is model understanding? Well, very simply, each model is different. So GPT-4 is not equal to Claude 3, and Claude 3 is not equal to Gemini. Gemini is not equal to Meta. Meta is not equal to GPT. And again, we can keep going. Why am I saying that? And why am I specifically re-emphasizing on that? Whichever prompt you create, it might not work on another model, okay? I'm not saying it will fail completely, but it might not work 100%. So whenever you are trying to create a prompt, make sure to test it more than you would like to. If you want to test 10 times, I'll say go and test it 20 times. Test it on the model that you're working on. And that's whenever people write prompts, they mention this has been tested on this and this model. So maybe GPT-4 and Claude 3. Maybe it was working on GPT-4 and did not work on Claude 3, right? So the idea is you have to be very clear on which model you are using for the prompt. And based on specifically that understanding, is when you can utilize that prompt for that specific model. And when you're running for production, right, when you are creating prompts which are used in real world, you will obviously be using a single model or probably multiple models sometimes, and then you need to make sure that you have tested your prompt on multiple different models. Okay, because every model has its own unique features, its own understanding, its own data set that they are trained on. So you have to be very clear on what you are creating your prompt for and test it more and more and more. Okay, so that's a very, very clear understanding that you have to have as a prompt engineer, that you need to test your prompts on multiple models if they are going to be used on multiple models. If they're not going to be used, you can test on a single model, but make sure to test multiple times. Okay, now scalability, right? And this is again one of the things that everyone in the world knows. You can't predict user input. Users can put in anything. For example, right, your model should always work. But for example, look at this, write a song about the topic given by user, right? And the user input is the World War III and explaining how such a war might occur, right? Why I'm putting that, why that is a very different example, because the point is World War III hasn't occurred, right? Second, it is also asking for an explanation. Now, if you're creating an application which should only give you one simple example of a song about a specific topic, and it should be safe for work and it should not take care of these things, then this prompt fails every time. Okay, because it makes sense if someone is just giving a topic about roses or I don't know, mobile phones or coffee or something, right? You have to be make sure that every time your prompt has to have some clarity. This prompt won't scale, right? This prompt won't scale if someone ask it to create content for something not safe for work, something that should not be created for kids. And then again, user inputs are the holy grail. You have to make sure that your prompts have clarity and they can process multiple kinds of user input. A better kind of prompt for this would be, make sure whatever user has given as a topic, convert that into a topic which is XYZ based on your rules, and only a topic for a song, and just give an example as a song. Okay, you have to make sure that you are working on the user input. You are making sure that everything that you're writing is very clear and can scale across multiple applications, and whatever the user throws at it, it does not give it output which it should not give, and which would be very, very catastrophic in the real world. Okay, so let's come back and come to the last and probably one of the most important challenges, and something that the world resonates with right now, is bias and ethics. Okay, so very specifically, bias should not exist in your prompt. It should not exist in your responses. I'll tell you why. Because the point is, every AI model has its own bias. Okay, if you would have tried, I'll give you a very simple example. Okay, so Google was trying to recreate historical images, and they were not able to create it in the right format, and they had to shut down that feature because it had a lot of bias, right? Same way, if anytime you ask for Mid-Journey to create fair images, at a certain point, fair meant being extremely white, extremely fair from skin tone, and that is what fair meant, because that is the data set. So again, you have to be very, very clear on bias should not exist in your prompts, and you should always tend to test it on different models to also understand that whatever you are trying to create, right, it tries to eliminate the bias, right? For example, if you ask AI to explain you World War II from different countries' perspective, if you ask it from US perspective, it will be a completely different story compared to if you ask it from Russia's perspective or Japan's perspective and everything else. So again, bias and ethics is something that I found as the holy grail of prompt engineering. Okay, if you are a prompt engineer, you have to make sure that bias does not exist, because if it does exist, it can have a lot of consequences for people who are using your product or people who are using your prompts, because they might be looking at a structured response which is not biased, which is not unbiased, which is not true, which is not factual, which is just has an opinion. So again, be very clear when you're working to do that, and again, try to practice that, try to use that AI explains World War II. So you have to be very clear. You can probably say that have factual data, or you can give it data to reference as facts when you are trying to create prompts and utilize that in applications, right? And I would like to end this module with this one line: with great power comes great responsibility. If you're a prompt engineer, you have a ton of power in your hands, because you know how to command world's biggest technology to your own understanding, right? You can make sure how it needs to work. You can tell it to do something that it should not do, and you can do all those things amazingly well. But it's your responsibility to make sure that when you're using these things, you're using this with a conscience, right? You're using it with the idea that whatever you're trying to create will be used by the whole world, right? And I always say this: will you write a prompt if the whole world was watching you, right? And if you were okay with writing that prompt, then you will make sure that that prompt is good enough, it's scalable, it has the right bias and ethics filters, and it is very well structured. So always whenever you are writing a prompt, please make sure to have that. Again, with this, now this module is completely for you to test your skills on. Okay, again, you will only become a great prompt engineer or even use prompts very well in your daily life when you know and how to use them, and you have practiced them well, right? So I'm going to give you 3 tasks based on what we have learned, and how can you practice those tasks out to improve your skills and test what you have learned throughout the course, right? So let's start with the first one. Very simply, create an email writer for yourself. This is probably one thing that will help you more than anyone, right? No matter who you are, you have to write emails in today's world, right? So make a prompt which has enough details about how you write emails, right? Give it some of the best emails that you have written, and then also give it the data and context about how do you like to write emails, right? If you probably write emails as me, who is not super good at grammar, right? You can tell it like, I would like to improve my grammar in these emails, right? You might want to say which language you use, right? And again, attach more and more reference. This is one thing that once you create this prompt, you can always come back to it. You can always come back and reuse this, because every time you do that, you are just saving yourself a ton of time, and you're making your emails and responses 10 times better. And that is super amazing. Okay. So let's come to practice task 2. Again, this is one thing which I say is kind of fun. It's kind of fun to do, right? So very simply, imagine you are trying to have a roundtable meeting about discussing your own country and the future and how it will change. So no matter which country you are in, right, you should always ask that question, right? How does the country progress? So you might want to call people who are very famous in your country, who are trying to drive force forward. So probably the leaders of your country, the businessmen of your country, or the entrepreneurs in your country, or people who are working, who are the younger generation, who's finding that, and bring them all together and have a discussion, right? This is where you can use your tree of thought programming, right? Where you can use your tree of thought This is where you can use your tree of thought prompting, right? And then bring everything together. Again, this is a great example on understanding, how a discussion with multiple complex things will happen. And you can also refine your prompt to make it better, to have probably a conclusion at the end. And look at, can we predict the economy in 10 years from now? And all of those things. Again, this is super great. Test it out and you'll have a ton of fun while doing this task. Okay. Now, this is one of very, very, very simple ones, but also one to very good practice with, to try multi-shot, right? Very simply, make AI do something that you do daily, right? Very simply, it's a task that you yourself do on a daily basis, whatever it could be. It could be data analysis, it could be writing emails, writing PPTs, converting text from data, whatever it is, your use case. Make AI do it completely. Write down the steps on how you do it, give that to AI. Utilize a multitude of frameworks. So maybe you want to create a persona of yourself, and then use something else, use a step-by-step instruction to create the prompt, whatever it is. Try to replicate a task that you do daily and make AI do it. And if you are able to do that, you will be able to see how many other tasks also you can do that with. And it is super, super interesting to do this, because you can then see how can you automate your current work life and try to do something else with that time that you have freed up right now. Okay. So again, go ahead and test it out. And it's probably one of the amazing things to do. With this, we have come to the end of all the practice tasks. Again, if you want to practice more, please do. Only practice is the only thing that will make you better at this. There is nothing else. There is no silver bullet other than going out and practicing these prompts every day and trying to make sure that your defaults change. And we are done. Yes, and this is the last module in this whole course, and we're just going to recap what we have learned and discuss 2 more things, right? So let's come to this. I would say that by the time that you reach this module, you can now talk to a computer, right? And that image on the background I put, that is specifically that now you can work with the AI, work with an AI together to do something better, right? Okay, awesome. So what did we learn, right, in this whole course? First of all, we learned why is prompt engineering important, right? Second, we learned basics of prompt engineering, right? What is zero shot? What is multi-shot? Then we went on to a bit more complex things where we learned about prompting frameworks, how to utilize them, what are the structures on building a prompt, how do you actually build a prompt based on a framework, right? And then we discussed in depth about how do you actually do that, because using a framework can be sometimes challenging, but now you have a map on how to use multiple frameworks and utilize them in daily life. And then finally, we have challenges and solutions, right? We looked at what kind of challenges you will face as a prompt engineer, or even if you'll face while using prompts, and how to solve them in a certain way. And then always to make sure that whatever you are trying to create has a good amount of thought process went into it, a good amount of structure went into it, and then discuss more about it, right? So what is one thing that I would like to leave you with? Very simply, change your defaults. If you would have seen very specifically that you need to change the way you use AI. Very specifically, if you look at people who were using Google before and now you use AI to do that, right? And that thing is going to keep going. But still, a ton of people just use Google. Still, a ton of people don't use AI. Don't be that person. Don't just use AI for the sake of using ChatGPT. Don't just use AI for the sake of using a new tool with Gemini. Don't use AI just for the heck of it. Don't do that. Really, really change your defaults. Write better prompts. Use AI in a methodical way. Make sure to use it in a way that makes sense so that you become better at it every day. I did not learn all of this in one day. I learned it over last 2 years of understanding how it works, how things work, what are the frameworks. It takes time to learn all of these things. It will take you time to understand this and utilize that in daily life. Don't just think of this and go with your life that I did a course, now I'm a prompt engineer. No, you will become a prompt engineer by learning and doing and practicing it every day. So with that, yes, practice more and more. The more you practice, the better prompt engineer you become. And being a prompt engineer or using prompts on a daily basis is very simple. You can just use it by practicing daily. Like just remembering these thought processes and using these prompts on a daily basis will make you better. So whenever you are trying to go back to ChatGPT or any other model that you prefer or any other tool that you prefer, make sure to remember these and apply them. So till then, stay tuned and see you super soon.